Yo, what's the word? Today I figured this will be a video for all my beginners out there. I'm gonna give you a breakdown. It kind of came to me when I was doing my bike check video that a lot of you guys might not even understand some of the stuff on a bike. Being a beginner, you might not know simple stuff like the size, and you might not know the height of the bars or why you should be getting parts. So I figured I'd make this video and give you guys a general explanation of every part. This is just, your average everyday biker in the community showing you guys. Hope you guys enjoy. After you guys have been riding a complete bike for a while, you might start thinking like, I want to get into a custom bike. So what I would recommend doing is, while you have your complete bike, start building your custom one on the side. I don't care if it takes 5 years. It took me like 3 or 4 years to build this bike. It took me a really long time. What I would recommend doing is starting with the frame. So when you start with the frame, the first thing you have to realize, and this is why I say you should get a complete bike, because they kind of build them to be sort of an all-around general geometric feel to it. But when you get a custom bike, you should know exactly how you ride, exactly what type of parts you want, and exactly what you're trying to get from the bike. So that way when you go and buy the parts, you're not buying, something, so you're not buying like tires that are for transition riding when, all you do is ride street all day and you need something a little bit harder. When you have a frame that you're trying to buy for the first time, what you want to look at is the top tube and the rear end. Now, they do have measurements for the seat tube and the head tube and stuff like that. But if you ask me, it really doesn't matter, because usually if the rear end is a certain point, then it kind of works with the rest of the frame. It usually means that it's geared towards one style of riding, if that makes sense. So basically, the main thing you should look for is, okay, say you ride street, something that's a little bit more technical, because you're going to be doing fakies and just a lot of quick little movements where you need to just kind of turn the bike and move it and get it where it's going. So you're going to want a heavier duty frame. So something I would recommend is, for the rear end, you're going to want something that's a little bit shorter. I recommend something that's something that's no more than 13 inches long for the rear end. So it should say like the chainstay length, or it should say rear end length. It usually should be around like 12.5 to like 13.8 or 9, I want to say I've seen. Street frame, you want it to be around like 12.8 to like 13 inches, or like a 13.1, like that lower 13, higher 12 area. And another thing you want to look for is the gussets on the top and bottom. My frame, it has gussets on the top and bottom, and what that does is it gives it extra strength by the head tube, because when you're doing hard landing off of stair sets and you're grinding on rails and you're doing all that heavy duty frame smacking, this extra piece of metal on the top and bottom helps keep those weld points nice and strong, since somebody had to sit there and weld those two pieces of metal together. Another thing I have is a 21-inch frame. That's the top tube. So 21 inches, they mean from right here to about right here. That means it's 21 inches long. So you'll kind of figure that out on your complete bike. If your knee smacks your stem a lot on your complete bike, then you're going to want something a little bit longer. So you're probably going to want like a 21-inch or something maybe a little bit longer than that if you're over 6 feet. If you're like me, 5'7", I'm a little bit short. I have 21. If you're like 5'5" or a little bit shorter than that, you might want 20.8 or 20.5. Some frames even come in 20.4, so it just makes it a little bit shorter. If you're unsure, just go for a 21-inch. Most people are comfortable with that. It's a little bit longer than like a kid's bike, but it's not super long, so you can't reach anything. If you're doing air out and transitions, then you don't really need a top and bottom gusset or anything like that. Just like the Sierra frame I bought from Fly Bikes, it actually comes with the bottom gusset, but they said that they only got it because of fans. They said they really didn't need it. The top of the frame, it doesn't have a top gusset, so it's still a strong frame, but if you were to use it for street use, over a long period of time, that frame would probably give out before a frame geared for street riding would, if that makes sense. Those are the things you have to kind of realize, because a lot of people, they'll build a custom bike completely, and the way they're using it is in the parts that are on it, you know, they're just so all over the place. And I'm just like, you know, that's a nice custom bike, but you know, the geometry of it makes absolutely no sense. You know, I don't understand how people would ride a bike that, you know, they just throw together. You know, some people just get a ton of money, build a custom bike, and then, you know, they don't even realize that there's a lot of research and things that you should do before you just go and, you know, pay $200 for a set of cranks or something like that. So yeah, once you figure out what kind of frame you got, the next thing you should do is think about your fork. So the fork, it kind of goes the same as with the frame. So if you're a street rider, you're gonna want a fork with a shorter offset. So I would recommend something like the Odyssey R25s. These have a really short offset, so when you're trying to really get into those nose manuals and do all that tech nose turnaround stuff, you can really like flip the bike into it. Now, if you are a transition rider, I would recommend something like the R32, or like what I'm gonna buy is the Flybike's Volcano fork. Now, the R32 has a 32mm offset, and by the way, guys, what the offset is the angle of how far the front wheel is from the fork. So the shorter that offset is, the closer the wheel is gonna be to you. The longer that offset is, the further the wheel is gonna be from you. It's kind of like a pattern that you guys should understand. If you're going for a street bike, you want everything kind of short and compact. But if you're going for a transition slash park bike, you want it a little bit longer. You know, not super long, but just a little bit. You just want to have a little bit longer of a ride when you're moving around. The R32s are traditional offsets. So what I'm gonna do is go for the Flybike's Volcano, because those forks have a offset of 30mm. So that's right in between 35 and 20. So I figure it's long enough to give me that transition feel, but it's a little bit shorter than the one I have now, so I'll still be able to have a little bit more responsive feel to it. Shorter offset, responsive feel, more of a streetway. A longer offset, you're gonna want it for transitions, you know, parks, ramps, half pipes, that type of stuff. Moving up from that, the headset. That's one of those things where it's really just personal preference. You know, stuff like bearings and things, I prefer Odyssey. This is an Odyssey integrated headset. This thing's lasted over 6 years. I haven't taken it apart once. It's good. It keeps my bike dialed. Has been loose once. It's amazing. Next thing you guys want to look at is your stem. So the stem on the bike is something crucial to how you guys are going to ride. I have an older style stem. This is probably from like 2010, maybe before that, maybe 2011, 2012. This is an older style front load stem. Something I realized is that if you get a top load stem, it allows you to do a lot of spin tricks a lot easier, and professionals have verified that. Stay tuned. Later in the future, I'm gonna get a top load stem for this bike and the new Sierra bike that I'm building. Something with the stem that you guys want to realize is, again, if you're doing street, you want something, it's really about the reach. Whatever type of, only way you should really, let me back up a minute. Only way you should really get a front load stem is if that's just your personal preference, which usually a lot of old school riders like it. But the top load stem, it has a reach of, if you're doing street, you want a reach to be like 48mm or 50mm or something just a little, just shorter. Like, I like to use the Flybike's Volcano stem, for example. They have 3 versions. They have the original Volcano stem, which is just regular, you know, it's kind of big, bulky. But then they have one geared for street, and then they have one geared for transition and trails. I'm gonna get the transition and trails one because that's the type of riding I do. And that one has a longer reach, which will give you more reach to do things like turn downs and, you know, kind of get over the bars and do all those tweaks and stuff like that. But if you are a street rider, you want the reach to be a little bit shorter, something like 48, so that way when you're doing all the turns and, you know, you're trying to do super quick bar spins, you know, that shorter diameter will help the bar get around a little bit faster so you can click those super technical tricks that you guys are trying to lay down. So once you figure out what kind of stem that you're trying to get, the next thing you want to do is figure out your handlebars. So the handlebars, you know, I see a lot of young guys, you know, dudes shorter than me with super tall, like perfect 10s, or, you know, the Odyssey 10 4s or super big bars. And I'm just like, dude, you're short as hell. Why do you have those big bars? So what I want you guys to really take into consideration is your height. If you're a short guy like me, you don't need big bars. These are older Fly Montana bars. This is back when pretty much every handlebar was the same size, and it was like about 8.5. Me, I'm about 5'7", and I've tested a lot of rises on handlebars just from friends and people at different skate parks. And I would say if you're about my height, 5'7", you shouldn't really be going for bars that are higher than about 9 inches. That's what I'm gonna move up to after this bike. But if you get something bigger than that, you need to be a dude that's at least like 6 foot, or you know, you got really long arms, or just something like that. Because I'm telling you guys, if you get those super big bars and you know you're a shorter guy like me, you try to bar spin, you're gonna be smacking your stomach, you're gonna be all over the place, and you know the bike is just gonna feel too big for you. So really take into consideration your height, because everybody should not ever have the same size bars. Grips are personal preference. One thing I would say is if you guys don't like to wear gloves, then I would get something a little bit softer, maybe like the ODIs or something like that, because a softer grip, you know, when you're riding around all day, you don't want to get calluses on your hand too bad. So a softer grip will help you guys stay comfortable while you're riding. Now, if you're like me and you wear gloves, I would go with something a little bit harder, because the gloves that you have on should already be soft inside. And if you have a harder grip on your bike, you're gonna feel a nice tight lock in. Even when it's 100 degrees outside like today, you'll still get a really good lock on those grips, and you'll be able to do bar spins and tweak and turn the bike however you need to do. Next thing I would look at when you get in a custom bike is wheels. Wheels, you can build them yourself. I wouldn't really, you know, you can true a wheel and build it by yourself, but depending on what hub you get, you might need shorter spokes, longer spokes. So I would recommend, if you're gonna build the wheel, you know, go to Empire BMX, call them up, tell them what kind of wheel you want, have them build it for you, and have them send it to you. And then, you know, 5 years, 6 years down the line in the future, when you need to get your wheel trued and tightened, just bring it to a local bike shop, or honestly call up Empire or something, see if you can send it in and have them true it for you. Because, you know, they got machines and stuff where they can do it perfectly. You can learn how to do it on your own, but me personally, I don't really like to do it. I'd just rather go to a bike shop, pay them 30 bucks, and call it a day, because I know it'll be perfect. Now, the type of wheel that you get, it doesn't matter too much. You just want to stick with brands that are a little bit more serious. You know, something like Odyssey, G Sports, Sunday. I always like to bring up Full Factory a lot, because you know they go through the 4130 heat treatment process, and their products are really good, guys. So I would recommend like Odyssey Hazard Lights or the G Sport rim, something like that. And the type of hubs you get, that's a little bit different. I ride profile minis front and back. That's because I'm more of a park rider, so I keep profiles on my bike. Now let me tell you guys something. If you do grinds, stay away from profiles. Profiles are actually racing hubs, so they're really just geared to be more is like strength and like speed. Another thing you guys should realize is if you're gonna do a lot of street riding, you know, you might want to consider a free coaster, even something like the Odyssey clutch. Because when you do, if you do 180s and you get into like those backwards manuals and you know you want to do all that tech type of stuff, free coaster wheel will do a lot better for you, because as soon as you land backwards, you don't have to backpedal, and it makes the fakie a lot easier when you're trying to do tech moves. If you want street hubs, you know, get something like that. But you know, if you're a transition rider like me, you know, go for like some profiles, or you know, you can try and get like a racing hub or something. I might even go for a Profile Elite, just because the engagement is good, and when I start learning how to air out a lot higher, you know, the Profile Elite will really keep the engagement going and keep the speed going. You know, I would recommend going on the website and getting like a set of complete wheels, just geared towards what type of riding you're trying to do, because it'll save you a lot of hassle with trying to build them, and you know, they're just ready right out the box. Alright, next you guys should be looking at your cranks here. What you guys want to take into consideration for your cranks is, again, if you're riding street and if you're riding transition and trail. If you're riding street, you're going to want something super short, like 165 or like 170. Now if you're doing transition and trails, you're gonna stick to something like 170 and maybe like 175. Me personally, I'm gonna go with some 170s just because I have 175s now, and every once in a while I have issues with my knee knocking on here, and I just feel like the closer position with the feet, it'll help with your spin and rotation and stuff like that. 170 millimeter cranks are a little bit newer, and a lot of transition people still ride those, but I did notice that a lot of street guys, they like to ride 65s, or 70s are good too, but 170 is just a good all-around area, but 175 I would say is specifically for transition, and 165 is like specifically for street, and then bam, 170 right in the middle. After your cranks, you want to grab some pedals. I would recommend, I don't know, I'd say like just some plastic, or really that one's up to you guys. I've seen people that ride dirt have plastic, and I've seen people that are in park with metal, and I've seen vice versa. So really whatever kind of pedals you guys like, go ahead and buy them. As far as a chain, I recommend half-link chains because they look a lot better and generally they're stronger. If you have a shorter frame, like if you're a street rider, a half-link chain will probably be easier to get a nice tighter dialed chain length on it, just because each of the link is like about half the size of a normal link. Next, I would say when you're choosing your sprocket, don't really think about it too hard. Sprocket's a sprocket. Just make sure that it's CNC machined. If you're building a custom bike, I would say that you stay away from anything that's not CNC machined. Like if it says forged, I would just stay away from it, because if you have a complete bike, a lot of stuff on there is probably already forged. So for you just to buy a replacement forged part, it might be okay, right now, but later down the line, you might break it and have issues in the future. If you guys are serious about the sport, put the money into it, and I'm telling you, you guys are gonna come out spending less in the long run because the parts will last a long time. This bike is living proof. Everything on here is about 7 years old, excluding the sprocket, the tires, and the grips, I would say. Okay, so the sprocket, like I said, make sure it's CNC machined. If you're a street rider, I'd probably go with something that's like a guard sprocket, just because when you do disasters and grinds and you're going on ledges and stuff like that, it'll keep your chain from grinding on it and possibly snapping and wearing down. That guard will really just chew up the concrete and stay in the way, and it'll keep you protected. If you're a trail rider, park rider, you really don't need a guard. You can just get like a regular sprocket. Another reason to get a guard sprocket is if you're like me and you don't wear chicken leg pants like a lot of people, you're a little bit baggier at the bottom. So if you get the guard sprocket, it'll help your pants from getting stuck into the chain, especially when you do fakies. Ever since I switched to a guard sprocket, that hasn't happened to me once, and before it used to happen to me almost every time I ride. So after you guys figure that out, you want to look at your bottom bracket. My bottom bracket is Black Label. Black Label is really good too, as far as like a bottom bracket. You want to take into consideration your spindle size as well, because when you get your cranks, you want to look for so I want to explain the cranks in the bottom bracket at like the same time. So the bottom bracket has to go with the cranks. I would say figure out what kind of cranks you want first, and then get your bottom bracket to go with it afterwards. Reason being, because when you get your cranks, if you're a street rider, you want something a little bit heavier duty, you want a thicker diameter. I'd go with something that's at least 22 millimeter. If you're a lighter rider, transition maybe, you can go for something like a 19 to save weight and stuff like that. Me personally, I like the 22 millimeter just because I like strength on parts. I'm really big about strength. 22 millimeter cranks, just a little bit stronger. I would recommend getting 2-piece cranks over 3-piece, just because 2-piece, it's a lot newer and the technology works a lot better than the old 3-piece, especially when you got your pinch bolts on it and all that. I just feel like a lot of that's just an old school thing, and the technology just works a lot better these days. Once you figure out that, then your bottom bracket. When you buy the bottom bracket, you want to make sure you choose the diameter that is the same size as your spindle. So when you buy your cranks, look at the specs and it'll say spindle size 19, 22, whatever. And then when you go to your bottom bracket, then it'll say 19, 22, whatever. Just make sure those two numbers match, and then buy your bottom bracket and your crank set at the same time, because when you install it, you can't do one without the other anyway. Next, I guess I could talk about tires. Tires, it really depends what you're trying to do. I'd say street tires and transition tires kind of work the same. They're slightly different, but the big difference is you don't really want dirt tires on like a park bike or street bike, just because it'll give you a lot of vibrations. You'll just hear like a vibration every time you go on ramps, and you'll feel a slight little vibration in your bars and stuff. But when you're on dirt, you want to get dirt tires, you know, like the Odyssey Edkins or something like that with a little bit more bite into it, so you can really get in that dirt and get up on those ramps. Now me, I got the Fit FAF tires. These are street and park tires. They're a little bit smoother. You know, they have really good tread, but it's also a smooth tread, so that way when you drop in, you don't get that hum noise. If you really don't like hum noise, get something like the Odyssey Dugan tire, because it's really flat and it's really made for transition and trail. Another thing to take into consideration is the tire width. If you're a transition rider, you don't really need a super fat, really big tire. You just need something that's a little bit, you know, you don't need something like a 2.10. Just get like a 2.25 or just like a 2.30. You don't need something really fat. But if you're a street rider, you want a nice thick wall, so when you're doing grinds and smacking it and doing all that, you got a lot of rubber in the way. So get like some 2.4s or 2.35s. I got 2.25s on this just because I don't ride super hard. I just do kind of like a flowy ride, transition ride. So that's where I get my tires from. Yeah. So, and then I guess the seat, you know, that's really just personal preference. A seat is a seat, you know, there's not like a seat that you're gonna grab and it just breaks apart. I like shadow seats just because they have a lot of cool designs. Sub Rosa too, they have a lot of cool designs, but ultimately it's up to you. You know, if you look at fly bikes, they have a lot of smoother, more luxurious looking seats and flatter seats. So that's just really like personal preference on what you guys are gonna do. So I think that's about everything. And if you guys have any questions about building a custom bike, or if you felt that I left anything out, just leave it in the comments and I'll answer it. So yeah, hope you guys learned a lot from this video and enjoy the bike life. Later.